What's up, guys? Metal571 here. Today I'm going to be talking about a bunch of Koss 60 ohm driver models, which, spoiler, my favorite of which is the Porta Pro. Now, I've covered the Porta Pro previously, but I'm going to be talking about a bunch of other headphones relative to the Porta Pro in this video, including the new Porta Pro wireless. Got the KPH30i, which is relatively new. Got the KSC75, which is a lot of people's favorites, and right now it's sitting on this Parts Express headband, which I'll explain a little bit more about later. And the KTXPRO1 doesn't get talked about very much, so I'm going to be talking about that. And finally, I even have the UR40 here, which is really not very popular among audiophile circles, and it's interesting. So I want to give a shout out to Koss. Thank you for sending me the Porta Pro wireless and the Porta Pro. I actually had a Porta Pro before, but I gave it away to a friend. That was definitely a mistake. I really like that headphone. So what does the Porta Pro sound like? Jumping straight into it here. There's a significant mid-bass bloom on these things at about 150 hertz. And there is some roll-off, but it's much less roll-off than I remember. The extension here can play 30 to 40 hertz, it seems, which is really remarkable for a headphone that at the time of this video is running like $30 on Amazon, which is just wow. So that was really impressive, although there are some limitations, of course, to what this thing can do. If you really crank this thing up, it will harmonically distort, so that means the bass gets looser and doesn't provide more volume. It just kind of starts bleeding into the upper bass. So, of course, the bass detail as well, in addition to that, is not really on the level of things like, the HD6XX, which it shouldn't be for such a relatively affordable headphone. I believe this was like $50 at the time I reviewed it last, normal price. I'm glad it's come down. I think at like something like $30 to $35, this is an incredible deal. The mids here, now these do actually have a little bit of a shout at 2K, and it's funny because I actually hardly noticed it at all. This is quite a warm headphone, to preface everything I'm saying here in this review, really. And I almost didn't even notice that the tuning of the mids was off a little bit until I compared again. This is why I compared everything to the 6XX and the 660S, which is back there. I have to get the mid tone right, and these are a little bit off. There's a little bit of a 2 to 3 dB 2K peak, but and that's pretty common with this driver in multiple different enclosures, as we'll see. But other than that, I mean, the mids are just great here. I mean, they're grainier than the Sennheisers and the higher end stuff, but I have no complaints about it at this price at all. And moving on to the treble, it's very warm. This is a really warm headphone. Even compared to the 650 or 6XX that I keep referring to here, it's even warmer than that by a couple of decibels. So unless you really want that smooth, super warm tone, this isn't going to be the best option for you. But for me, I think this is awesome. And you can bend the headband a little bit, which I'll talk about in a second here. But the other problem this thing has is there's not that much air above 10K. There's a lot less air going on above 10K here than a lot of nicer headphones. That's actually one of the first things you notice. And it's funny because the 650 is known to have sort of a veil, but compared to this is a lot more dead sounding than even that. So it is what it is. Probably not some stuff you can really fix with EQ. You can try, but I didn't really end up touching the treble on this thing. You just have to take it for what it is. And it is a really relaxed sounding headphone, which it can be very enjoyable for some genres, and some people will really not like it for others. It's the way it is. And the soundstage here, so interestingly, I thought the imaging sounded fairer than the 650/6XX, but in that it's less 3-blobby. So the Sennheisers always have this thing where the side images are pronounced and then the center image is pronounced, but somewhere in between instruments in the middle of the sound field and the sides are not as distinct. And so that's kind of how the Sennheisers have always been. If you've watched any of my other videos, I've probably said this like 5 times now at this point, but just to make sure everyone's on the same page. But now with these, I think there's less of that problem, but the stage is actually even smaller than the Sennheisers in my experience. So it's quite intimate, but it's still better than an M40X or an M50X. It is astounding how small the soundstage is on those Audio-Technicas. I was so surprised by that last time when I reviewed the M40X recently. So let's talk about some of the other stuff about each one of these headphones compared to the Porta Pro and why you may or may not like it and how they all kind of compare, basically. The first thing to know is that there's essentially 2 versions of the driver that goes into this thing. They're all 60 ohm, 101 decibel per milliwatt open dynamics. They're very, very easy to drive. You don't really have a problem with needing an amp for these things. None of these headphones really that I'm going to talk about here. But one of them is titanium coated on the diaphragms, one's not. The Porta Pro is the original not coated version of the headphone, at least to my knowledge. That's what they do to it to change it. And the KSC75 is the most common titanium version of the same driver. And so those are the 2 primary drivers here. So again, the Porta Pro, some other stuff about it. I still think it's a little too warm for some tastes. You know, it's not going to have the ultimate resolution of higher end headphones, of course, but I think it works great for modern music that's mastered really bright. And it's so amazingly affordable. Some other stuff. The headband has always been strange to me. I mean, it's so this is how this headphone works. Basically, it comes coiled up. Not coiled up. What am I talking about? It comes like this, and when you unclick it, there's like this little hook at the top here, and then these parts come out, these wings, and then once you put it on your head, you can slide this to make it taller or smaller like that. And on the top of that, there's a comfort zone, which is hilarious, slider on the side that goes from firm to light. By default, when this wing is in all the way, it's firm, and then as you slide this, you can pull this out, flip it out more. It clicks as it goes back into place. I always wear it on the lightest setting, and it got to the point where I was like, well, this is ridiculous. I should probably do a little bit of bending, and I did. And so if you're careful, you won't break this thing. As far as I can tell, bending the headband is not really a big deal. But if you have a large head like I do, of course, then the sound is really, really dark, you can actually bring some of the treble back in focus and a little bit more resolution. And these are also very, very positionally dependent on your ear. Where you move them around, you want to play around with where they're sitting on your ear. They're all on your headphones, and they react a lot to positional changes. So that's some stuff to know about that headphone. Now the wireless version is essentially the same sounding actually as the original Porta Pro as far as I can tell, and Ratings has very similar measurements for both. They have, I think, the Porta Pro KTX, I don't remember. There's some weird version that I think is compatible with as an inline mic or an inline remote for Apple products, something like that. But yeah, the Porta Pro wireless is basically the same thing as a Porta Pro, but now you've got this weird kind of tacked on battery and control over here. Yeah, so they make some sounds when they turn on and off. And there's an LED in this thing. The one use for video that Metal 571 actually used, as opposed to just podcasting about headphones, is this blinking blue light here is always on, and I think some people are going to really not like that, and I think that's a little bit of an oversight for the Bluetooth model of this thing. That light is always blinking every like couple seconds to tell that it's on. I don't know. I think that's a normal thing for some headphones, but I don't know why that's 100% necessary. So other than the sound being about the same as the Porta Pro still, the wireless version only supports SBC and aptX as far as I can tell for codecs. There's not like a wide codec support. It doesn't do aptX HD or LDAC or any of those other higher end, less lossy, not lossless Bluetooth codecs. That's not supported here. And for $80, that seems a little expensive for what's going on here. there's way more than enough volume. This thing gets super loud. In fact, I almost feel like there should be more volume steps, so you don't have to worry about that. Unfortunately, though, if you listen carefully, there is a slight buzz in the background on these, being powered by whatever the headphone amp and DAC they put into this inline cable here. And so that might annoy some people. So, you know, if you buy these, I feel like that this is kind of I recommend it, but it's with a lot of like uncertainty, because, you know, the buzz might bother you, it might be so low you won't notice it. I hardly noticed it myself. And $80 is expensive for what's like a $30 headphone with like this tacked on wire. I mean, yeah, so that's how the Porta Pro wireless is. It is nice though, because the battery life's very long. I don't know exactly how long it is, but I have only charged it once, and I've already had this thing for like a month or something or more. I didn't even charge out of the box, and it just kept going and going. It's surprising. All right, so the KSC75. Now this is a headphone I've requested to review a lot, and I'm finally getting around to it. I actually had one of these for quite a while. And this Parts Express headband's really, really inexpensive. It's like a couple dollars. If you just Google Parts Express headband or whatever, I think this will come up. And it comes with some really awful headphone drivers on it. But what you can do is you can take the clips off of the KSC75. Normally it has clips. You literally can just pull it off, the clip, and then they just push it on to here, and it's compatible. And then you can mess with this headband, which obviously I've bent a lot. You can bend this one without damaging it, and you can adjust kind of how the headphone sounds a lot. Like again, these are very like clamping force and position are huge factors for the sound of these Koss headphones. So being able to customize that's a big deal. I didn't really find the clips too comfortable. I still have them, but I mean, you guys can look up pictures of what they look like. But I don't know. They didn't sit. I guess you could bend the clips probably too. I think some people have done that to make them fit better. But for me, this was the better option. So this headphone seems to outresolve the Porta Pro quite handily. It's really really surprising how much detail this stupid thing has for being like $15 or $20 or something. I think it's usually hovering around there. It's crazy. And that's what really shocks people about this headphone. But there's also it's also a lot brighter, which is probably a plus for many people who don't like the super warm Porta Pro kind of tone. This is one of the titanium coated 60 ohm headphones I have here. Unfortunately though, you're trading a lot of bass extension. Like, I didn't remember the bass extension being that different between the Porta Pro driver and this one, but it is significantly different. And if you're listening to electronic music, this is going to not hit very low. You might be kind of disappointed in the way this can do deep sub bass, because it doesn't do it very well. So you're kind of trade off that bass extension ability for a brighter and cleaner sounding mid-range and treble here. I'd say probably at least 3 to 5 dB, probably more like 5 dB brighter. It's a lot brighter. I think I'm going to put a Porta Pro versus KSC75 graph from the MiniDSP ears in the description if you want to look at that. But measuring on your headphones against over-ear headphones on the MiniDSP ears is just a no-go because of the acoustic impedance. That's a whole other video. So I can only compare on-ears to on-ears with some of my measurements there. But yeah, so there's a lot of peakiness going on at 2K, 4K, and 10K on this thing to my ears compared to the Porta Pro, which has almost none of those peaks except for the 2K peak, and it's a lot brighter, and there's a lot more detail, but you lose the bass extension. So that's the gist of the KSC75. I still think it's a crazy good value, though, and if you really want to hear what a decent headphone detail-wise sounds like for really cheap, that's a good way to give it a shot. If you're not sure about it, you want to enter the hobby, that's a great option to test some stuff out. All right, moving on, let's talk about the KPH30i. So the KPH30i is pretty recent. It came out in the last couple of years. Now this is just, as far as I can tell, just using the Porta Pro driver again, so the non-titanium coated model. There's definitely a family resemblance in sound here to the Porta Pro, but I thought there was less 2K shout, but you can't bend this headband. However, the headband is so much better than the Porta Pro, because sometimes the Porta Pro headband can catch can catch your hair and like rip it apart. And this never does that. This is much more comfortable for people who like a more traditional headband, which is nice. However, that means you can't really adjust the clamping force of this thing very well. I was at least too scared to go bending this thing because I think this plastic will probably break on you. And because of that, you know, there was a little bit too much clamp for my head, and so this one ended up being real dark out of the box, even darker than the Porta Pro in the highs, I think. And there's a little more mid-bass, which is probably accentuating that as well. It's not an enormous difference, but if you compare the two side by side, you'll see that the mids are a little different, a little bit less 2K here, and a little bit more mid-bass here. So these are quite a mid-bassy headphone, whereas the Porta Pro was already fairly mid-bass. This is a little bit more. But unfortunately, there's like a rubberized cup kind of holder part here. I don't know how to describe what this is, but I guess a kind of a gimbal. This goes around, but it's held by rubber, and this rubber is very, like, it's very resistive to changing direction. So actually what happens is this ends up sitting on kind of like the back of your ear, and over time that irritated me a little bit. So again, the comfort here not quite as good as the Porta Pro, where the cups are just sitting lazily here and they just move. They can rotate all over the place. Wow, how do I even show this? They just rotate all the time, and there's like almost no resistance there, whereas these are held in place a lot more strongly. So the headband's better. The sound is a little bit more mid-bassy than the Porta Pro. I really like the sound of this, but I think the long-term comfort was just not quite as good. So that's the KPH30i. Those are also going for like 30-something bucks, so it's a pretty good deal. Now here's the one that, now let's get into stuff that people don't talk about very much, which I thought was pretty interesting. So I found a KTXPRO1 on Amazon Warehouse. I just had to get it because I wanted to do an ultimate comparison review here. And so this is using the titanium driver from the KSC75, whereas the KPH30i and the Porta Pro do not. This does actually use the KSC75 type of driver in a different enclosure though. And this is an interesting headphone because it kind of combines the warmer tone of the Porta Pro, but with the lesser capabilities in the bass of the KSC75. So the bass, it seems like whenever you throw this titanium coated driver in this thing, the bass just does not have as much extension. That's just the way it is. And so that's true here. But interestingly, the highs, despite this being the titanium driver, it doesn't sound anything like the KSC75. It's a lot warmer, and I think it was a little bit better detail, but not like crazy forward detail like the KSC75 has. Although I think the fit on this one is just bizarre. I mean, the headband is comfortable and all, but the way these hinges turn doesn't really seem to correlate to much anatomy. You'll see when you actually put them on. But yeah, I don't understand this hinge going like this. That's odd. I feel like it should have been at a different angle. So it wasn't the most comfortable for me, but that's what the KTXPRO1 is. And it's worth a look because it is real cheap. I think it hovers around the KSC75's price. And lastly, the UR40, which interestingly, I did not buy this new. This was also from Amazon Warehouse. Interesting, one of the drivers had developed a loose connection while just sitting on my desk after like a week. And but I was able to listen to it for a while without that problem. And this one's bizarre. There doesn't seem to be much of a mid-bass hump here. This is also using the titanium driver, by the way. It actually says titanium on it, which you might actually be able to see now that I have a new Logitech webcam. It doesn't seem to have much of a mid-bass hump. The mids are really, really pushed back because there's a significant 10K peak that's a lot brighter than the KSC75. So like the mids are kind of buried relative to this 10K peak, and then there's not as much mid-bass. It's a bizarre sounding headphone. I'm not sure if I'd really recommend it. It's also built really cheap. And the other problem was, not like the others aren't built cheap, but this just feels really plasticky to me. I don't know why. Also, the pads here are not deep at all, and they really should have been. There really should have been more depth to them. Except I have the feeling that as soon as you make one of these 60 ohm driver headphones into an over-ear, something happens that ruins them, because it seems like the driver wants to be right up against your ear. And so if you have an over-ear headphone, now you have a little bit more distance, and so that probably messed up the mids and treble transitions. Koss tried to make it work, but it doesn't sound like it was great. So unfortunately, I'm not sure I can recommend the UR40. Not too many people buy it, but it was just an interesting adventure to go on to include in this comparison with all these other headphones, because there's a lot of headphones in this review. So what does all this mean? What are my picks here? It seems like the Porta Pro KSC75, especially on the Parts Express headband, and the KPH30i and KTXPRO1, those all get a pass from me. I think they all have their little niches of, you know, what people are going to want out of a headphone. They may find them in one of those models, but if it was up to me, I pick the Porta Pro every time, because I gotta have that bass extension. And the warmer highs don't bother me, even though they're real warm. Like, they're even warmer than the 650. They're like an Odyssey warm, kind of. But a little different, a lot different, actually, tuning than that. A lot more normal sounding tuning. So I really like the Porta Pro. I was surprised the sub bass was as good as it was. I don't remember that. And at $30, it's crazy. Last thing I want to say here is that I think Tile once said the LCD3 was his desert island headphone. I'd say that, you know, the Porta Pro is so good that, you know, after hearing these multi-$1,000 headphones at multiple meets over the years and having reviewed all this stuff for you guys, I could live with this, actually, as a daily driver headphone. It's that good. And I wouldn't miss too much of my higher end stuff. Maybe I would miss it a little bit, but I could actually use this as like a daily driver and be pretty happy with it. It's really quite a decent headphone for people who like warmer tunings, or people who are not used to the brighter, more diffuse field targeted audiophile headphones, which is probably most people out there. Actually, if you've never gotten into the hobby, you probably are used to much warmer tunings, and so the Porta Pro is great for that. Alright, thanks guys. I know this was a long one, but and I want to thank my patrons as well. I used some of that patron money to upgrade some lighting. I added an extra bulb or two here, and you're also seeing, this is the first video I'm shooting with a Logitech Brio webcam. Even though it's a 4K webcam, I figured 1080p 60 FPS would probably be better, since you guys want to see my reaction to things, I guess. I guess that's what you guys like, I don't know. And this mic has a nice new Rode windscreen on it, which is way less bizarre looking. Maybe more suggestive looking, I don't know. But it definitely blocks less view here. And the wider angle of the camera, I don't know if I like that yet, but it works. So let me know how it all sounds and works. I think that's it for this video, so I'll see you guys in the next review.